I invite you to stand out of respect for the reading of the gospel. Scripture comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 35 and verses 41 through 51. John 6, 35, verses 41 through 51. Here the scripture reads, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Then the Jews began to complain about him because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They were saying, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, I have come down from heaven? Jesus answered them, do not complain among yourselves. No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me, and I will raise that person up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Today is the day that we have blessed the athletes and all their equipment at Lawrenceville First. You're going to win so many tennis matches, it's just not even funny. But remember, if you've bet somebody money on those tennis matches, I have a rule that says 20% on ill-begotten gains. It's a hard time of year because we're gearing up for football, and Friday night lights have already started in some schools. College teams are practicing, and so college colors are flying around, but we've not yet finished with baseball, and I think we're going to have October baseball. I don't know what you think, but yeah, it's coming, isn't it? So we're going to be into October with baseball and still have football going on, and then we're going to be in football till after the first of the year when basketball starts, and that's not counting all those other things. Some people like football way better than they do baseball, and other people are right the opposite, but the fact of the matter is athletes compete with each other and sometimes with their own records. Now, I don't know what you did with your children, but if my children wasn't going to try to win, they might as well stay home. That's a waste of time to go to the ball field for them to just play around. They need to try to win. If they don't win, they need to have tried their hardest. They were never punished if they really tried. But if they going to stand around in the outfield and pick daisies, we going to stay at home. They shouldn't hurt anybody, but the whole object of the game is to try to win. Sometimes athletes compete with themselves to get a better record or a better score. But perceptions will fool you. Baseball, football. Let's listen to some perceptions.
Baseball is a 19th century pastoral game. Football is a 20th century technological struggle. Baseball is played on a diamond, in a park, the baseball park. Football is played on a gridiron in a stadium, sometimes called Soldier Field or War Memorial Stadium. Baseball begins in the spring, the season of new life. Football begins in the fall when everything is dying. In football, you wear a helmet. In baseball, you wear a cap. Football is concerned with downs. What down is it? Baseball is concerned with ups. Who's up? Are you up? I'm not up. He's up. In football, you receive a penalty. In baseball, you make an error. Whoops. Football has hitting, clipping, spearing, blocking, piling on, late hitting, unnecessary roughness, and personal fouls. Baseball has the sacrifice. Football is played in any kind of weather. Rain, sleet, snow, hail, mud. Can't read the numbers on the field, can't read the yard markers, can't read the players' numbers. The struggle will continue. In baseball, if it rains, we don't come out to play. I can't come out to play. It's raining out. In football, the object is for the quarterback, otherwise known as the field general, to be on target with his aerial assault, riddling the defense by hitting his receivers with deadly accuracy, in spite of the blitz, even if he has to use the shotgun. With short bullet passes and long bombs, he marches his troops into enemy territory, balancing this aerial assault with a sustained ground attack which punches holes in the forward wall of the enemy's defensive line. In baseball, the object is to go home and to be safe. I hope I'll be safe at home. Safe at home.
Perceptions sometimes fool you. Sometimes we have the right impression of someone or something, and other times not so much. We used to have what's now called covenant meetings, but we called them then interviews. So you would get word from the superintendent that the bishop had appointed to your church a certain preacher. And that preacher would come for an interview and would meet with the SPR committee. The perception was that you were going to get to interview the preacher. You were going to be told the preacher, and the preacher was going to come, and you were going to meet together and decide how they moved, what moving company they were going to use, who was going to pay them, and who was going to pay for what, and what the salary would be. And the perception of that is that you had some control over it. And the perception from the pastor's point of view was that they had some control over it. The fact of the matter is neither of us did, nor do. We are an itinerant system, and I'm not going to say too much about that because Jared and I are going to talk to you about the itinerant system and how it works Wednesday night. Is that right? Okay. He tells me where I'm supposed to be and I go. So Wednesday night we're going to tell you about the itineracy. Perceptions are funny things and they speak volumes. When a preacher gets to a new church, they try to perceive who the best leaders are. They watch, they listen, they observe. They look and see who's in office now. They look at the financial state of the church. Who helped get it that way? All those things. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we get it wrong. But perspectives speak volumes. Some of you have said to me, I don't understand why you want to socialize during the prelude. Prelude is to help us prepare for worship, and you dashing up and down the aisles and talking to people and ha, and then trying to find out how people are and what's going on in their lives and all that sort of stuff. You need to do that at a different time. You need to go someplace and sit down and pray. people's perception is that I talk to some of you more than I talk to the others. And it upsets you if I don't talk to you just as much as I talk to somebody else, unless you don't like me, and then you hope I don't come by to speak to you. I try to be fair. I try to get around to everybody. I like to speak to everybody. I really do. And I can say I'm sorry 1,000 different ways to let you know that if you'll just tell me, I'll spend more time with you. But I can't fix what I don't know. A better way to form a perception is to have some conversation or a discussion or a little education, or figure out what it is that the church really enjoys. I like people. Even the ones I don't like, I love. But if I'm doing something that really irritates the bulk of you, then I can do it a different way. A better way is to observe and ask and then listen for explanations or reasons for somebody's behavior. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was an associate, my perception of a man was horribly wrong. He would go into committee meetings and he would fling fits, and he wanted to decide right now, and why is this taking so long, and call the question, and we're ready to get done and move on. And on a particular night, when there was a lot of discussion, he went into one of those tirades and with the senior pastor, and I dismissed the meeting. I just said, this meeting is over. You're dismissed. We'll come back next week with cooler heads and warmer hearts. And the man looked at me and said, you can't do that. And I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can. And the preacher looked at me and said, you can't do that. And I said, yeah, I'm real sure I can. Perceptions. Now, months and months and months later, I learned that that man that I was really angry with because he was so mean to the senior pastor that night was a Vietnam vet. And his job was to go to scouting out front of everybody else, to go to an area, a hill, a city, and determine what the cost would be to take that. What's it going to cost us in civilians? What is it going to cost us in our boys and girls? What's it going to cost in the military on the other side? What will we benefit and what will we lose, and what is the cost? And he could do it in an instant. And so when we couldn't decide whether we were going to call the bathrooms men and women, boys and girls, or male and female, it drove him nuts. He wasn't mean at all. He had his priorities lined up differently than most of us, and rightly so. Perceptions. On both sides, the one who is being perceived and the one who is doing the perceiving. Right or wrong, perceptions are powerful. Sometimes reality and perceptions are two different things. Sometimes reality and our perception of reality are two different things. Now, being a preacher, lots of preachers perceive that job as wearing robes and getting your phalanges straight and sitting with books spread out all over your desk and spending 2 or 3 days working on a sermon and reading and studying. That's what we're supposed to do. That's not a reality. And I want you to know that my best work is done outside of the office, not in it, unless you happen to come by and want to chat for a while. Every day I come to work and I have a list of things that I want to accomplish before the end of the day. Hardly ever do I accomplish them because I'm sitting in Deeb's office because somebody has come in, and I get up and walk over there to see what Deeb's talking about and to visit with that person. Sometimes I'm in Steve's office and we're talking about who we're going to go see and who needs to go where and what's happening with pastoral care. Sometimes I go down to Grace Arbor and dance with the old folks that are down there. I'm in the people business, not the paper business. I can work on a sermon when I get home. Atticus does not bother me. I try to take a day off to surround myself with the books that I love and try to come up with a sermon. But hear this. Before I'm in the paper business, I'm in the people business. Now, all these people that were surrounding Christ during this text, as we read this text, perceive him differently than he is. They perceive Christ as not divine. As a matter of fact, right there in the text, it says, "Isn't this the son of Joseph?" Their perception is he's just a little hometown boy that may have gotten too big for his britches. The reality is Christ is the Son of God. The reality is he is fully divine and can meet our every need in an instant. They perceive when he's talking about communion, did you read it? About the breaking of the bread and the pouring of the wine and the sipping of the wine and the breaking of the bread and the little taste of bread and the little taste of wine. They perceive all that as cannibalism because he's talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. Now, to the Catholics, they believe that that's really true, that somehow mysteriously it has become the body and blood of Christ. For us Methodists, the reality is that he's talking about Jesus becoming a part of them and them becoming a part of Jesus, and they're talking about high and holy symbols. Anybody know what a symbol is? The choir told me last time I asked this. They forgot already. Do you know again what the symbol is? Symbol is something that points to something higher, something with more authority. A symbol is something that points to a greater than the symbol. And if it's a holy symbol, a sacred symbol, a spiritual symbol, it gets even more complicated with layers because this symbol for us, the taste of the juice or the wine and the little piece of bread becomes a very high and very holy symbol, and we don't take that lightly. If you will watch as we serve, if one of us drops a piece of bread that has any size to it, we'll stop and pick it up because we don't want you trotting on that. We don't want to accidentally step on that. And when communion is over, we don't discard it with the rubbish. It doesn't go in a trash can or be poured down a drain. It goes outside so that the night scavengers can come and get it, or the day birds can come and gobble it up. And the juice is poured back to the ground because it's such a high and holy symbols. That little piece of bread and that little bit of grape juice. The people perceive Jesus showing them the face of a prophet or maybe an earthly king. But the reality is he is showing them the face of God. They are talking about things that they perceive as important. Can I tell you a few? Things that will make them bitter, things that will make them angry, things that will make them hurtful and hateful of each other. Do you know the two places that it's easier to find those things that make people angry and bitter and hateful and hurtful? In your family and in your church. I didn't get to be the chair of that. I wanted to be the teacher of that class. Why didn't I get to meet in that room? Why can't we meet on the night I want to meet? In the family, it's things like an old ice cream freezer that has a turn crank, and Mama loved that ice cream freezer, and my sister wants it, and I want it, but I want it worse, and she used to give it to me because I was always the one that turned the crank. Never mind that the crank's broke and it won't turn anymore. And then, first thing you know, we've lost a sister over a broken manual ice cream freezer that they sell for $39.95 at the hardware store. They are fretting over things that they perceive will fill them up and satisfy them. Getting enough money in bank accounts, driving the right cars, living in the right houses, living in the right school districts, and on and on and on and on and on. And sometimes people have not grabbed hold of the reality that the only thing that will ever really satisfy them is being in the perfect will of God. They perceive God as foreign, removed, authoritative, powerful, mighty, vengeful. He's got some electric finger that we don't know about that's going to point over the banister of heaven and shock you when you're not looking. Psst. But the reality is that God is the ultimate authority, but He loves us. The reality is that God is mighty, but He's tender. The reality is that God is powerful, but filled with mercy. The reality is that God is not vengeful at all, but forgiving and compassionate. And God is not far away from us, but He looks down on us and into our very souls to woo us and to court us and to bring us close to His side. God knew if He came and showed us His face that it would be so very holy, it would absolutely consume us and disintegrate us. And so, instead, He put on skin and came to earth as a tiny baby, fully human, to live with us, to pitch His tent with us, to eat with us, to pray with us. And our precision is, most of the time, our precision of God is that He's a little bit off His rocker. He preaches forgiveness 7 times 7, or 40 times 40, or as many as necessary. Forgiveness that many times when somebody has wronged you. He's a little bit off his rocker. He wants us to preach and teach and love and pray for our enemies. Bad chance of that. He's a little bit strange in that he preaches that the poor are really rich and the rich are really poor. And I believe this. I'll stand by this. The things that make you really rich are things that cannot be bought with money. Let me see if I can say that again. Things that make you really rich cannot be bought with money. This Jesus gave places of honor to the sick and the poor, the outcast, the lepers, the women, the marginal. The reality is that he is right. And until we are ready to face that reality, we can never be the person or the church that God has called us to be. I am convinced and am persuaded that the best way for us to move forward is with the good Methodist middle. I am convinced and persuaded that we have far more in common than we do have differences. And that if we will just talk with each other and love each other, that the Methodist Church will go down in history as being one of the finest institutions in all the world. Let's see what we can do good together instead of tearing each other apart. The church is better when we do it that way. Perceptions. There are some people who actually perceive the church as a safe place, like in baseball. I hope that's reality. But some of the places where I have been most wounded has been in the church. And we can do better. We can be better. When I walked around Emory as a student, I had no idea where I was going 90% of the time. When I went back chaplain in the hospital, I had no idea where I was going most of the time. But I learned this. On top of Cannon Chapel, there is an arch. Inside that arch is cement, except for one place where a cross is dug out of that cement. And in the late fall, in the winter, in the early spring, you can see that cross from anywhere on campus. If you want to go to the public health building, look for the cross, and then you can line it up. You want to go to the law building, look for the cross, and you can line it up. And I learned that, and I can't tell you how many times I've stopped and said, "Oh, Eggleston, look at the cross," and then just go diagonal to the cross. You'll find it. I don't know how many times I told people, if you will just look to the cross, you can find the way you're supposed to be going. I believe that still today, and not just about Emory. If we really want to live in reality, we have to practice just like an athlete. You want to be a good ball player, you need to practice. You want to be a good tennis player, you have to practice. You want to be a good lacrosse player, you have to practice. Now, I have one grandson left that's playing football. He's going into the 5th grade, and I don't want him to practice. I don't want him to be good at that sport. I don't want his head messed up. But he says to me, "Mommy, don't worry, my head is very hard." And I pay $100 for a helmet that will help him keep his head very hard. You have to practice. The reality is that God calls us to service, calls us to sacrifice, calls us to practice. The reality is that God expects us to be our best selves all the time, every single day. And if we don't practice being our best selves, we never will. But when we do practice being our best selves, that's all He asks for. That's all the angels in heaven can do is their best. And some people's best looks different from other people's best. And all God calls for is our best. If you want to be good at praying, you better practice praying. If you want to be good at forgiving, you better practice forgiving. If you want to be good at loving all God's children, you better get started. If you want to be good at worship and commitment, you need to start practicing if you haven't already. And you can't worship. Are you listening? You cannot worship and sit on your pocketbook at the same time. Part of worship is giving back to God. Better start practicing. That's September. I'm sorry, I digress. Need to practice hospitality with everyone who enters this place, and radical hospitality. We need to practice every day of our lives. The perception of success is how much money we make, and the reality is it's not nearly as important how much we get as how much we give. Reality is an important piece. Did I tell you the story of the Greyhound? Fred Craddock preached this sermon. I love Fred Craddock. When we lost Fred Craddock, we really lost some wisdom. He went to visit his niece, and she had adopted a retired greyhound, and it was laying in the floor. And she went to the kitchen to fix sandwiches. And Dr. Craddock got to talking to the old dog, and he said, "So you were a racer?" "Yes, sir." "Well, why did you quit?" "Well, just got tired." Aren't you anxious to get back to running?" "No." "Were you losing and they were going to get rid of you?" No, I was still winning a lot of money." "They work you too hard?" "No, they were careful about that." "How was your living conditions?" "Oh, they were great. I had a cool kennel." "Did they feed you well, or did they half starve you to death?" No, they fed me very well, best foods." "Well, what made you quit?" And the old dog looked up to him with tired eyes, and he said, "Because I realized what I was chasing wasn't real." Aren't you tired of chasing those things that are not real? Isn't it time for our perception to line up with what is real?